Do you mind sharing how much you were getting paid, how much you were making as a truck driver in your time as a truck driver?
Yeah, I started out at 25 cents a mile, and then I got bumped up to 26 cents a mile. So we had a minimum pay, which was sort of a new pay scheme that the industry had started to introduce to, because there's lots of unpaid work and time. And so we had a minimum pay of $500 a week that you would get if you didn't drive enough miles to exceed that. You get paid in sort of so you get paid when you turn the bills in, which is the paperwork that goes with the load. So you have to get that back to your company, and then that's how they bill the customer.
Hmm.
And so you might get a bunch of those bills that kind of bunch up in one week. So I might get a paycheck for $1,200, and I mean I was a poor graduate student, so this was real money to me. And so I had this sort of natural incentive to earn a lot, or to maximize my pay. Some weeks were that minimum 500, very few, and then some I'd get 1,200, 1,300 bucks. Pay has gone up. Typical drivers now starting in the 30s. In the kind of job that I was in, 30s, cents per mile, 30 to 35.
So can we try to reverse engineer that math, how that maps to the actual hours? So there's the hours connected to driving are so widely dispersed. As you said, some of them don't count as actual work, some of it does. That's a very interesting discussion that we'll then continue when we start talking about autonomous trucking. But you're saying all these cents per mile kind of thing. How does that map to like hourly average hourly wage?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is also an interesting technology story in the end. And it's the technology story that didn't happen. So pay per mile was, invented by companies when you couldn't surveil drivers. You didn't know what they were doing, right? And you wanted them to have some skin in the game. And so you'd say, here's the load. It's going from, for me, I might start in, the Northeast, maybe in upstate New York with a load of beer. I'd say, here's this load of beer. Bring it to this address in Michigan. We're going to pay you by the mile, right? If I was being paid by the hour, I might just pull over at the diner and have breakfast. So you're paid by the mile, but increasingly over time, the typical driver is spending more and more time doing non-driving tasks. There's lots of reasons for that. One of which is railroads have captured a lot of freight that goes long distances now. Another one is traffic congestion. And the other one is that drivers are pretty cheap, and they're almost always the low people on the totem pole in some segments, and so their time is used really inefficiently. So I might go to that brewery to pick up that load of Bud Light, and their dock staff may be busy loading up 5 other trucks, and they'll say, go over there and sit and wait, and we'll call you on the CB when the dock's ready. So you wait there a couple hours. They bring you in. You never know what's happening in the truck. Sometimes they're loading it with a forklift. Maybe they're throwing 14 pallets on there full of kegs. But sometimes it'll take them hours, and you're sitting in that truck and you're essentially unpaid. Then you pull out, you've got control over what you're going to get paid based on how you drive that load. And then on the other end, you got a similar situation of kind of waiting. So
So if that's the way truck drivers are paid, then there's a low incentive for the optimization of the supply chain to make them more efficient, right? To utilize truck labor more efficiently.
absolutely.
And so that's a technology problem that one of several technology problems that could be addressed. I mean, what did if we just linger on it, what are we talking about in terms of dollars per hour? Is it close to minimum wage? Is it, there's something you talk about. There was a conception or a misconception that truckers get paid a lot
Yeah,
for their work. Do they get paid a lot for their work?
some do. And I think that's part of the complexity. So, what interested me as an ethnographer about this was, I'm interested in the kind of economic conceptions that people have in their heads and how they lead to certain decisions in labor markets. Why some people become an entrepreneur and other people become a wage laborer, or why some people want to be doctors and other people want to be truck drivers. That conception, right, is getting shaped in these labor markets, is the argument of the book. And the fact that drivers can hear, or potential drivers can hear about these workers who make $100,000 plus, which happens regularly in the trucking industry. There are many truck drivers who make more than $100,000 a year, is an attraction. But the industry is highly segmented. And so the entry level segment, and we can probably get into this, but the industry is dominated by few dozen really large companies that are self-insured and can train new drivers. So if you want those good jobs, you've got to have several years, up until recently. Now the labor market's becoming tighter, but you had to have several years of accident-free, perfectly clean record driving to get into them. The other part of the segment, those drivers often don't make minimum wage. But this leads to one of the sort of central issues that has been in the courts and in the legislature, in some states, is what should truck drivers get paid for? Right? The industry, for the last 30 years or so, has said essentially it's the hours that they log for safety reasons for the Department of Transportation. Right? Now, since the drivers are paid by the mile, they try to minimize those because those hours are limited by the federal government. So the federal government says you can't drive more than 60 hours in a week as a long haul truck driver. Mm-hmm. And so you want to drive as many miles as you can in those 60 hours. And so you underreport them, mm-hmm. right? And so what happens is the companies say, well, that guy, he only said he logged 45 hours of work that week or 50 hours of work. That's all we have to pay him minimum wage for. When in fact, a typical truck driver in these jobs will work, according to most people, would sort of define it as like, okay, I'm at the customer location, I'm waiting to load, I'm doing some paperwork, I'm inspecting the truck, I'm fueling it, just waiting to, get put in the dock. 80 to 90 hours would be sort of a typical work week for one of these drivers. And just when you look at that, they don't make minimum wage oftentimes.
Right. Just to be clear, what we're dancing around here is that a little bit over, a little bit under minimum wage is nevertheless most truck drivers seem to be making close to minimum wage. Like this is so like we maybe haven't made that clear. There's a few that make quite a bit of money, but like you're as an entry and for years you're operating essentially minimum wage and potentially far less than minimum wage if you actually count the number of hours that are taken out of your life due to your dedication to trucking.
Well, if you count like the hours taken out of your life, then you got to go, maybe a full 24.
That's right. Yeah. From family, from the high quality of life parts of your life.
Yeah. And there's a whole nother set of rules that the Department of Labor has, which basically say that a truck driver who's dispatched away from home for more than a day should get minimum wage 24 hours a day. And that could be a state minimum wage. But typically what it would work out to for most drivers is that, the minimum wage for a truck driver should be 50s of thousands, $55,000, $60,000 should be the minimum wage of a truck driver. And you probably heard about the truck driver shortage. Like if, which I hope we can talk about, if the minimum wage for truck drivers is as it should be on the books at, around $60,000, we wouldn't have a shortage of truck drivers.
Oh, wow. And to me, $60,000 is not a lot of money for this kind of job, because this is essentially two jobs, and two jobs where you don't get to sleep with your wife or see your kids at night. That's $60,000 is a very little money for that. But you're saying if it was $60,000, you wouldn't even have the shortage.
If that was the minimum.
If that was the minimum.
And I think that's now we have drivers who start in the 30s.
Wow.
But yeah. And I mean, so we're talking 2-3 jobs really. When you look at the total hours that people are working they can work over 100. If they're a trainer, training other truck drivers, well over 100 hours a week.